All right. So hopefully you can see my screen. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So this is one practice, 1 hour. Essentially, the plan is to take the next hour, and we're going to look at mobile code, which has been somewhat changed in 800.171 Rev 3. And we're basically going to develop a full implementation for it from scratch. So on my screen, you can see my little informal checklist for what makes a good implementation. These are the things I want to make sure that my system security plan, as well as my my system for performing compliance, all support. So, all right, moving in. So here is my system security plan for Rev 3. And in Rev 3, instead of being one big requirement, they split it into two requirements. So this first one, 3.13.13a, is brand new assessment objectives. Right. So first off, you need the assessment objectives. Not terribly important to look at the actual practice requirement. Very, very important to know what the assessors are going to be looking at. We need to know process owner. It's really nice to have this crosswalk to 853, especially now that NIST is aligning the two frameworks, 800.171 and 853 together. So first off, what does this even mean? Right? What the heck is mobile code? Is it my cell phone? Is it the Google Play Store? Is it the Apple Store? What is this, right? So I'm going to go figure out what this means first. And in this case, mobile code is actually one of the most misunderstood requirements, which is why I picked it. And so you can read what I just pasted in here, but essentially it is, so mobile code is code that is not compiled until it's executed inside of a trusted application. Okay, so examples are Office macros, PowerShell scripts, batch scripts, inside your website, as your, like Discord right now is executing JavaScript, I'm pretty sure, in order to give us this live experience. Those scripts are very, very hard to protect against because you have to trust the application that you're using to run the scripts, okay, from a computer standpoint. So your operating system trusts your web browser, kind of, right? It probably trusts your Google Chrome or your Edge or your Firefox or whatever you're using to access Discord, because that's an app that you need to be able to run, right? If your antivirus blocked your web browser, you'd be like, this computer is useless, and you'd go get a different computer. In the same way, other technologies like your Microsoft Office, your Adobe Reader for PDF, your PowerShell, your batch, your command line, those can all run uncompiled scripts, and we need those to be functional, right? Your IT department is using PowerShell all the time. Command line could or might not be good, right? Office macros, again, may or may not be good. If you're a Microsoft customer and you need to be able to pull up the product placemat, you've probably noticed that there's some major macros going on in that thing. And if we just stopped all of them, we wouldn't be able to work. So mobile code is special in that it's sketchy, right? It's dangerous. This is definitely an attack avenue. But our normal methods of controlling it don't work because we can't just go, I'm not going to allow Chrome to run. I'm not going to allow Microsoft Word to run, right? Because then we wouldn't be able to work. So when I'm looking at a requirement that is hard to understand, or it's a situation where I'm not sure if the assessor is going to properly appreciate my viewpoint, I actually spend the extra amount of time to literally write an explanation like this of this is how I define this term. This is how I look at this, right? This is why I think that it applies in this way and not that way. And this is not an implementation at all. This is just getting everyone on the same page about what I think is happening with this requirement. Okay. Which is why it's highlighted like this. So now we need to think, how are we going to implement this? Well, acceptable mobile code is defined. Acceptable mobile code technologies are defined. Well, that's probably not something I want to write a procedure for. It would be a pretty dumb procedure to write for this thing, right? Because the procedure would be basically somebody thinks hard, they write down a definition, they check with some other people, see if it's a good definition, and then they save the document. Woohoo procedure. You may think that that is ridiculous, but if you're old school and you lived through CMMC version 1, you might actually remember that in the CMMI days of CMMC, that was literally the only way you could pass your assessment, was to write a step-by-step procedure for every assessment objective, no matter how stupid it was. And luckily, we're now in CMMC version 2, and that was a major change that they made, that they're being logical about this now. So how can you define this stuff? Well, you could actually define acceptable and technologies and code in the SSP, right? Your users do not need to know what mobile code is to perform their job. Your IT department does, at least some of them. Your compliance people do. But throwing every single define into a policy, not necessary. You need policies to be actionable. And so for me, when I look at this, there's some things that absolutely I want to put into a policy. Some things don't need to be defined in a policy. In this case, I want to make sure that the IT department knows that they have to define what's acceptable, right? So let's look at the policy, which is going to be used for this. By the way, I hate talking to myself, and we've got an hour. So, if you've got a question, I'm not sure how to safely put your hand up, but I'm very happy to do some back and forth on this. So here's our policies. Well, with mobile code, defining the mobile code technologies that are authorized is probably going to be done by a human. Probably going to be done as part of configuration management. So I'm going to look down in our configuration management area. So this is what my policy for configuration management looks like for the secure builds area. Actually, let me bounce up to the component inventory. Okay, so there's actually multiple places where I think it's important to address mobile code technology. The first one is in our software inventory, which is essentially these are all the applications that could run mobile code. Oh, we've got chat, right? Let me finish my thought here, and then I'll look at the chat. So remember that mobile code executes in the context of a different application, right? So that sketchy batch script is going to execute in the context of command.exe. That sketchy Office macro is going to execute in the context of Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. So the best place to track what mobile code is allowed is actually at the software level. So what this policy says is we're going to keep records of the software that is allowed in the software inventory database. And we're going to keep a record of what mobile code technologies are authorized for use on it. So what that looks like, not that one, here we go, is here's my IT department databases. And this is a test build, so it's kind of a stripped down demo area. But here's my Google Chrome. And if you scroll down a bit, you'll see that we are authorizing JavaScript and PDF for Google Chrome. And that's my proof that we've authorized those technologies. Right. So let's see, do we have comments? Clip, it makes sense to define once within the family of controls and then relate back. I'm not sure what a family of controls is. You want to clarify? You are allowed to unmute. So I think while you're typing, let's talk about defining and identifying. So you can, with this requirement that says to define acceptable mobile code and technologies, a lot of these define assessment objectives are really, really difficult to handle because how in the world do you define every acceptable JavaScript in all the websites that all your users might possibly go browse? It's impossible, right? And you'll also see it in a couple of the other assessment objectives where it'll be like acceptable uses of the system are defined. Unacceptable use of the system is defined, right? And it's just so much to try to write down. It becomes
can you hear anything in the background? Like Amira talking? Oh, sorry. Apologize.
If you can't hear me, here, I'll type in chat. Okay. I might need to leave and rejoin because the browser is a little bit weird on that. Okay. Anyways, so when you've got this impossible to define situation, there's a couple tricks. You can refer out the defining. Okay, so in our case, antivirus programs are a way of controlling mobile code. Right? If you have a high quality antivirus program, it will review all those scripts, all those batch files, right? All the PDFs, and it will attempt to block the bad ones. So you can say that the antivirus program is going to determine whether it's good or not for us. Another thing you can do is you can say the opposite of that define, right? So for acceptable mobile code is defined, you can say, well, unacceptable mobile code is mobile code that maliciously alters the computer, attempts privilege escalation, it exfiltrates data, right? And then you could say, therefore, acceptable mobile code is anything but what I just defined as unacceptable. And by the way, that's a pro tip. I've done multiple real assessments where companies get really strung up with this definition thing where it's impossible to define something. And if they just took the opposite stance where they said, we don't allow these things, therefore everything else is acceptable to us, they'd be okay. The assessors would be like, fine. But if you don't try to discuss it, you get in trouble. Okay, so anyways, we added a policy item that said we're going to list off our mobile code technologies, and that's how we know what's defined as acceptable. We need to talk about our antivirus programs. So let's go down to the antivirus program. So it'd be malware threat protection. And we need to talk about how our antivirus programs need to be able to protect us from mobile code. And the reason why we're putting this statement into a policy is so that our IT users who are paying attention to the systems protection policy know that whenever they introduce a new antivirus program, that it needs to be able to handle mobile code. So we're going to go back into the SSP and catch that SSP up. Essentially, we're saying, hey, go look here. Right, here's our authorized mobile code technologies, and here's our little tag that says we're talking about assessment objective 2. And then we're going to do the next one, which was that antivirus program shall be configured. So here's our statement. This policy requires antivirus programs to block suspected malicious mobile code. And here's our little tag that says assessment objective 1 is handled by that sentence. By the way, I'm starting to see this more and more as a general practice for SSPs, and I love it. It makes it really easy for an assessor when you tag which assessment objectives you're talking about, because they can just be like, oh, okay, how does this statement compare to this exact item? Right? They absolutely adore it when you do that. All right, and then let's talk about what is acceptable mobile code, because we have not solved that one yet. And this is where I've decided that it makes sense to put this definition into the SSP, because it really does not matter to the operations of anyone what our definition of acceptable mobile code is, right? We need to make sure that our antivirus is active. We need to document authorized mobile code technologies, but this is an assessment item, right? It's kind of silly to make policies just because somebody has an assessment objective where they're going to ask a question about you. All right, so I see from Crash Master, application allow listing systems will work from controlling mobile code as well. Awesome pro tip. Mobile code is authorized and defined through application X. Yep, if it can do that. Yep. All right, next. We need to talk about how we're going to prevent mobile code from executing, specifically mobile code technology. So we're going to go to our policy. IV6, so this is in the configuration management area. And I'm going to add a line right here to our secure build guidance, which says, hey, as you're doing all these other things to lock down a new system, don't forget you need to disable mobile code technologies that are not authorized unless they have been listed as acceptable in the software inventory database. Right, so this is the policies is what gives us longevity. It gives us the ability to control something long term, even as personnel rotate. So you should be thinking about that sort of use case. At no point in today's presentation am I going to start writing a procedure for how we control mobile code and mobile code technologies, because it's a technology thing, right? We need to control it using configurations, by setting up the system correctly, which is overall controlled by a good change management and configuration management process. But making a step-by-step procedure for how you click through and create a script or a antivirus configuration once and apply it to your environment is, in my opinion, pretty silly. That's not a procedure, right? That's a you should not write a procedure for something that you will do once. You write notes, right? Maybe you put into your activity log for the change ticket, but creating an entire procedure for something that you configure exactly once in your environment and then it just keeps working is really silly, in my opinion. And luckily, now that we're in CMMC version 2, hasn't been required anymore. So I got this policy item added in, right? All of our future builds will include disabling mobile code that's not authorized. And now I'm going to update my system security plan to talk about that. So here's where I'm talking about the policy I just put in. It explains what is going on, right? And here's where I'm linking in the definition of acceptable to the software inventory database, right? Making it really clear, using the same words as the assessment objectives use, what we're talking about. So I see, are we ready? Is that true for application deployment as well? Write procedure for something you do 1x. I mean, it depends. You're welcome to unmute and we can talk it through.
Sure. So we definitely have a debate within my team when solutions are deployed as to how much documentation we have to develop, because some team members say, well, we only have to do this one time. Why do I have to document it? We've deployed it, it's done. And then other people say, well, what if we had to rebuild it? You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have people who deploy with code and some people who don't. So just curious as to your thoughts on that.
So I am definitely more on the end of documentation is good. There are absolutely requirements that say when you perform a change, they need to be logged. They need to be documented, which can mean a lot of things depending on who you ask. In my environment, when I build a new system, I do capture the configurations that are made, the steps that are needed to rebuild it. But that's from the perspective of a baseline. So if I needed to rebuild it, how can I bring it back up to where it was? And that could be literally just backing it up, right? Making an image of it, or saving a config backup, so that you can rebaseline it later. What I'm kind of ranting about with the procedure thing is when CMMC was very strongly controlled by CMMI thinking, and CMMI is very, very, very procedure and policy based. The assessors were requiring documentation for stuff that didn't make sense. For example, there's companies that have, say, databases, right? ERP systems where you can have a supervisor fill out a form to request a new employee, and it routes to another department and goes through review and then the accounts are created with permissions, right? And that's all inside of this system, this directory controlling, database system, right? And it's streamlined, and there's a whole lot of stuff that happens in the background that you don't even see. That system, in my opinion, is an amazing way to do access control because it forces people to do all the steps. It forces all the reviews and authorizations. It keeps track of it, right? You can look at logs, all that stuff. But that system would have failed the CMMI assessment because there wasn't a 20-page step-by-step written procedure for what that system did. It was too black box. So I think that's wrong, right? As long as you can get to from the start to the end in a reliable manner correctly, we don't need to have every single step in the middle documented. And Ribo's giving good intel in the comments. So yeah, if it's something like a group policy, right? So like half the requirements in CMMC are technical things. You're creating a firewall, you're deploying a group policy, you're pushing the script. Writing a step-by-step procedure for how you write a script is silly. Keeping a copy of the script is not silly. You should keep a copy of the script. And that's the baseline, right? So are we ready? Yes, absolutely. You want to be able to revert and recover if something goes wrong. It's more about writing documentation for the sake of documentation that I don't believe in. It all needs to be useful for some reason.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So we have thoroughly talked about these two assessment objectives, and we have record keeping, right? We have evidence, so we have policies that we can point assessors at, which keep this working long term. We have our software inventory database, which is governed by the change management and configuration management processes, so that should stay up to date. We do want to pick who's in charge. For this one, I'd be generally looking at, one of your sysadmin type leaders, generally your CIO. And then you might mark this implemented, right? Okay, but we're not done with mobile code. We're on to the next requirement. Authorize, monitor, and control the use of mobile code. So this actually should look pretty familiar to you guys because assessment objective 2 and 3 are the same. One is new. So how are we going to do this? So in, let's see. So we do need some sort of a policy to make sure that as we change our environment, as staff rotate, that everyone knows that we have to be able to control and authorize mobile code. We've already got these policies set up for mobile code, right? Which we built out for the last requirement. So we have our build policy to say lock that down. We have our software component inventory that says, when you add new software to our authorized list, make sure you identify the mobile code that's allowed. And then we've got the antivirus policy that says all of our antiviruses need to help control mobile code. So we're going to go back to the SSP and just remind the assessors that we have some policy for that already. Now we need to talk really specifically about how we are authorizing the use of mobile code. Well, you may remember that I was lamenting that it's really hard to authorize mobile code because that's, millions of JavaScripts that run in browsers and it's macros, right? And you don't know what is out there. So we can broadly authorize it by authorizing the use of mobile code technologies, right, which we just talked about. And then we can granularly authorize mobile code using our antivirus. So I'm going to talk about how we do that. So this is an example of a statement about how we perform granular authorization using our specific technology. We've got our tags, right? We're still talking about authorization here. And I think we can move on to the next assessment objective at this point. So the next one is the use of mobile code is monitored. So how do we monitor mobile code? First off, do we need a policy defined in order to be able to show that we are monitoring mobile code? I'm not sure, right? It's kind of duplicate to the policies we already have that say audit the execution of processes and what files are running on computers. It's kind of it would be writing policy for policy's sake. So I don't really think that we need a separate policy item just to say we're going to monitor mobile code. We already have plenty of policy that says we're going to monitor the environment and capture audit logs. But we do need to make sure we can monitor mobile code execution. So there's two ways to do it in our environment. The first way is through the antivirus, right? So again, we can delegate responsibility for monitoring to the antivirus, which is the effective way of doing it. Because if you ask me as a sysadmin to somehow monitor everything that my users look at manually, it's not going to work, right? So I'm going to say mobile code, let's see, mobile code execution is monitored primarily by Windows Defender. But one of the pro tips is whenever you see the word monitor as an assessment objective for CMMC, you should have a plan for how you're going to show the assessor that you can pull that information up. You need to be able to actually pull up the audit logs whenever it says monitor. So we also need a way of doing that. Right, so let's look at our audit log procedure, which you should probably have something like that in your environment for every single one of those monitor requirements. Let's see. So this is what my audit log procedure looks like for the mobile code items. So you can see I have headers that say what it does. In the SSP, I reference to those exact sections so that there's no question about what I'm talking about. And I need to be able to actually demonstrate this live, right? So here's the steps to get to that spot. Defender for endpoint, advanced hunting. Let me pull that up. So here's my Defender for endpoint. And I'm going to actually grab the script and run it. So an assessor should be pretty happy seeing that you can pull up this information and you can get to the level of detail of what sub-processes are executing in the context of Edge or PowerShell or whatever. The other one is my PowerShell. So when my company went through our DIBCAC assessment, I literally showed the assessors these as part of showing that we were monitoring mobile code. And being able to just go to the procedure, have the query, run it, and then show results gives them a lot of confidence that you know what you're doing. Right. But of course, the most effective way to actually monitor mobile code is via the antivirus, and that would be up in the incidents and alerts area, which in this environment we don't have any active right now. Now, next up, let's talk about controlling. So, first way we control mobile code is by limiting mobile code technologies in the environment. By the way, we've all got mobile code technologies that are enabled on our computers. JavaScript, PDF, maybe not Malthus macros, but PowerShell is enabled, right? For you to succeed at CMMC, you do not need to disable all mobile code. That is not a requirement. It doesn't say disable the use of mobile code. It says control it. So when you're starting out, one of the pro tips, right, is don't say that I'm going to restrict PDF or restrict JavaScript and then figure out how to do it later. Whatever your computers do by default, write those down as allowed, as acceptable, right? And then start a project to figure out if you can easily and effectively limit them, or if you even want to, right? But where you can go very wrong with all of this control and authorization is if you say we don't allow JavaScript and then you don't effectively limit it, right? So if you're saying my web browsers aren't allowed to use JavaScript and the assessor goes, great, open up Chrome, go to settings, oh, look, it allows JavaScript. That's where you're going to fail. It's much better to be a little bit less stringent and match what your environment is actually doing than it is to be super duper secure, which is somewhat unreasonable in this case, and then not actually follow your own policies. All right, we need a little bit more to talk about on how we're going to control mobile code. So we just talked about controlling mobile code technologies, but we actually need to talk about mobile code because that's the assessment objective. So here we're talking about our antivirus is controlling mobile code for us. And then here's where we talk about where you can actually see it. Right, here's the actual policies and settings that you can review for it being applied. So let's go look at that. So if we go to endpoint security, let me go look up what that path is. So I always recommend putting the path to the relevant configuration or policy or GPO right in the SSP. Because when you're being assessed and you didn't sleep all last night because you were stressed out, it's really nice to just be able to go right here and be like, okay, endpoint security, attack surface reduction, and okay. So let's go find it. Not that one. Endpoint security, attack surface reduction, attack surface reduction for Windows, right? And now you can come in here and look at the configuration settings, and the assessor can say, yeah, that looks like you're controlling mobile code right there. And the other one is essentially turning on our antivirus, right? Our policy which enforces antivirus on our computers. So that's endpoint security, antivirus. All right, let me go find that one. So endpoint security, antivirus. And here's where we have, let's see, real-time monitoring is turned on. Right, scanning is turned on. Script scanning is turned on. From here, again, we can hit the top. Who's in charge of it, right? Is it good enough? Have we implemented it fully? So all of these responses have been for basically Windows 10 or 11, which is stuff that I use in my environment. In terms of scoping, you also have to think, is there anything else that these requirements apply to? Well, if you had MacBooks, it would apply to MacBooks. This also applies to your external systems, your clouds. So, for example, Microsoft, on their back end, on the servers that are running, Office 365, they should be also authorizing, monitoring, and controlling the use of mobile code. And we should be talking about them for these requirements as well, right? Or at least considering them for these requirements. Now, the A+ method, and I'm going to give a hat tip to Ribo because he's actually the one that taught me this about 3 years ago. The A+ method is you go to Microsoft and you request their FedRAMP package. And you get the actual system security plan for Microsoft 365, for Azure. You get the control implementation summary, you get the audit report. And you go double check this requirement in their SSP. Right? Here's that cross-reference to 853. You go read it. And you make sure that Microsoft is doing it on their side. Right? They're protecting their environment because you can't. You have to trust them to do that. And if they are, which if they're FedRAMP authorized, they should be, right? Almost 100% guarantee that they are. You can just say, our 365 cloud is performing this practice for FedRAMP authorization, reference, SSP, control, whatever it was, SC8, I think, SC18. Right. So that's a really nice way to describe inheritance. And if you do it this way, you're probably going to want to plan to make that SSP available to the assessors. What most companies actually do, because they don't know to do all this, is they just ignore their cloud. They don't talk about it at all. And if it comes up, the assessor either thinks to themselves, well, I know it's FedRAMP, and they just go on, or that company gets in trouble, right? Or if they're lucky, maybe the assessor is not thinking that day, and they just forget that there's a cloud out there that needs to also be doing this requirement. But Gold Star would be actually addressing each of your external environments, especially if you're storing CUI in them. Right. So Crash says, would we document equivalence to FedRAMP moderate this way? Pretty much, yes. So the DFARS Cyber FAQ, let me pull that up. This is one of the very best sources of information about how to handle different weird situations with 800-171 and DFARS, and a lot of it is very applicable to CMMC. Equivalent. Let me hold on. All right, well, that's not going to work. FedRAMP. Oh, there's 53 of those. Probably question 115. Hold on. So answer 115. So this is a new addition to this DFARS Cyber FAQ, which was added in 2021. And it says that, if you're trying to figure out if your cloud is equivalent, you would do it in the same way you normally ensure anything that you buy is meeting your requirements, right? So do you have proof that they're actually doing it and they're not lying? So the absolute best proof, if you ask any assessor, is they will say, well, you should go get a third-party audit report, right? You should go insist that that company gets third-party audited and that you see the report from that third party. And that is generally what is a safe tactic to take with this FedRAMP equivalency, right? Go get them assessed by a FedRAMP 3 PAO, get that audit report, and make sure it says that they're doing all the things. The reality on the ground is if a company has spent the millions of dollars it takes to get all of their operations fully FedRAMP moderate, and they've spent the money to get a 3 PAO assessment, it's not that much extra effort to get into the FedRAMP marketplace, right? So why wouldn't they, if they're actually doing all the stuff and they don't have a marketplace listing or they don't have a equivalency proof from a third party, why is that? The Saint points out that they need a government sponsor. That's true. That's the one good reason, right? Is that they need at least one government organization to want to buy services from that cloud. But what is much more likely is if a cloud is saying that we're FedRAMP equivalent and they can't provide you a attestation letter or an audit report, they are probably using the definition of equivalent, which is not doing security and saying that they're equivalent. And I've had the conversation with probably 10 different cloud vendors over the last 4 years where they say, what does that actually mean? And I explain it to them. You have to do all of the 853 moderate baseline controls, which is over 300, and it's very stringent. And they say, oh no, that would cost millions of dollars. And then they ask, is anybody going to assess us? And I say, no. And they say, oh, good. Okay, we're going to say we're FedRAMP equivalent, right? And I barf. Anyways, but this paragraph is actually a very good, or this page is a very, very good answer to how you should consider it. And in hopefully a week or two, we're going to get that CMMC rule come out, and that should have way more detail on what FedRAMP equivalent means. All right, so that's one practice, 1 hour. Mobile code is a very technical thing. It's governed by the change management process. That's how you make sure that it's implemented in your environment. Questions, thoughts, comments? So CMMC question mark says, what did you say was coming out with FedRAMP equivalent guidance? So there is a DFARS rule that's coming out soon, and we call it the CMMC final rule, which will be published for, we'll be able to read it hopefully soon, very soon. And that thing is very long. At least that's what we've been told, and it's going to go into all sorts of detail about everything, and we're all going to lose our minds when we see it, because it will probably contradict unexpectedly and cause issues. But one of the things that's almost guaranteed to be discussed in that rule is what FedRAMP equivalency means to the DoD. All right. So the last word is, just to put this into context, the documents that I have been showing you, even though I stripped out the stuff and, showed you how I built them, those are actually stuff that my company offers to our clients. They're called the Carry Compliance Documentation and the Carry Reference Architecture. The documentation is all about the manual processes and policies and SSP to do all the CMMC level 2 stuff. And I was showing you our work on Rev 3, which we're heads down doing all of that. And then the reference architecture is the technical bits, right? The actual configurations, how we're going to handle it with laptops, etc. And you can see it gets, very, very detailed with exactly how you do it. So I appreciate the nice remarks from Crash. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam C.